The reason I'm here, as a concerned citizen, a father, taxpayer, what I know is that Common Core is bad news on many levels. It's bad for the teachers, it's bad for our students, and it's bad for the taxpayers. Okay? This is not a partisan issue. When I've been at people's doors campaigning, it's usually for a Republican candidate. This has nothing to do with Republican, Democrat. As a matter of fact, State Senator Jeff Van Drew from Cape May County just this past summer brought before the state legislature a bill designed to block the full implementation of Common Core until it could be further examined by a state committee to determine whether or not it deserved implementation at the state level. Because there's still a lot of doubt in people's minds, which Dr. Peg will discuss. Okay, but what happened was when he brought this before the state legislature, to the surprise of many, it passed by nearly unanimous vote. I don't know the exact number, it was something like 74-2. It was ridiculous what the numbers were. Across party lines, everyone agreed that this should be delayed until they could get to the bottom of things. Now what happened was our governor stepped in and vetoed that and wanted to rush Common Core through. Why? I have no idea. There's speculation that it has to do with reimbursement of education money, which is not quite clear. But anyway, this is a bipartisan issue across party lines. This isn't Republican versus Democrat, liberal versus conservative, or any such thing. It's everyone realizing that in order to get on the Common Core, you have to throw common sense out the window. Okay, I would like to thank all our volunteers who are manning our tables around the room. We have several videographers set up in the back of the room. More than anything, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out to learn what Common Core entails. And the next person I'd like to bring forward is Lisa Vassallo. If it wasn't for her, this event would not be taking place tonight. She was the catalyst behind it. Please give her a warm round of applause. Lisa.
So we can get Dr. Luksik up on stage. All right, thank you for coming this evening. I happened to stumble upon Common Core when I was on Facebook and I saw one of those crazy math problems that I'm sure all of you have seen. I looked into it some more and was shocked by what I was finding. And then I realized there was an outcry nationally regarding Common Core. So I decided to dig some more. It's our duty as parents and grandparents and teachers to protect the children and be their voice. That's why I brought Dr. Luksik here, to tell you the facts regarding Common Core. I just want to take a minute and personally thank those who donated. Some of you are in the room, Esther and Eric Libenschek, and Karen Sands and Kim Podesta. You've all helped me put this event together. Dr. Peg, I'm just going to give you a quick little background on Dr. Peg so you know who she is. She's a Pennsylvania teacher with over 35 years of experience in both special education and elementary education. She's taught at every level from preschool to college. She's trained teachers in curriculum and classroom management as well as written and evaluated curricula. Peg served as an advisor to President Reagan's Commission on the Family and worked for the Commission on the Family and worked for the U.S. Department of Education, where her task was to review and evaluate education reform initiatives. Most importantly, Peg and Jim and her husband of 35 years have raised 6 wonderful children and are now proud grandparents. Before I welcome her, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Albert Einstein. "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." Now please help me welcome Dr. Luksik.
First time I ever gave a speech, I stood up and the podium was bigger than me, so now I don't stand behind the podium. You're going to be looking at the screen. The screen is more important than I am. I'm prettier than the screen, but the screen will have the information. Before we start, I want to give you just a few, this is the commercial portion of the program. When you came in, if you didn't get one, they're on the table. It's called Just Like McDonald's. The website is on there. I read a weekly blog on issues like Common Core. The paper's free, signing up for the blog is free. I write about once a week. I don't write more than once a week because I don't have time. so you don't get a lot of spam from me. But do pick up a copy, and how you sign up, the website where you go is right on the paper, so you can take advantage of that. There are also videos in the back. I'm going to be feeding you through a fire hose tonight, and what happens is people say, I followed everything you said, but I don't necessarily remember it all. And where did you get all the documentation? So what we did was we took presentations, and I had an engineer, so you're actually looking at the screen. You won't see me, you'll hear me, but you'll be looking at the original documents so that you can stop it, you can download it. There are 3 choices. I don't have a produced one for New Jersey because I haven't done New Jersey enough yet, but the state closest to you is New York. So there's a New York video so that you can see what a neighboring state is doing. A lot of the stuff is the same because it's federal. There's also one called Invalid and Unreliable. That's on the testing of Common Core. Common Core is based on an assessment system. Promotion, graduation, and teacher evaluation is based on these state assessments, and you're told that they're valid and reliable. Those words actually mean something, and so what I do is I take the definition and walk through comparing the actual definitions to what's happening in the testing so that you can see what's wrong with the testing and be able to argue it. The third one, the red one, should our children be standardized? What happens in schools when you say, by government fiat, that every child will learn the same knowledge to the same degree at the same time? What does that do to classrooms? What does that do to teachers? And what does that do to education? This one also includes the Advanced Placement U.S. History. New standards that are out, you've probably heard of it, it's called APUSH, Advanced Placement U.S. History, think of the initials, where they don't mention people like Thomas Jefferson, and they teach World War II without mentioning Adolf Hitler. So if you want to know what the new history courses are about to look like, you would want the red one. They're in the back. These are not free because I have to pay to make them. So they're $10, and they'll be in the back, and you can help yourself at the end. The documents you're going to see on the screen are newspaper articles, actual curriculum examples, and they are also contract language from your state Department of Education to the U.S. Department of Education. Why do I use those kinds of documents? Because when the state is applying for money or looking for relief from regulations, it's like a contract. Sort of like when you go to the bank for a loan and the bank says, how much money did you make? And you say $1,000, and the bank said, can I see your IRS tax return? Because you might lie to the bank, but you didn't lie to the IRS. Similarly, if your state Department of Education tells you that they're doing X, but they told the U.S. Department of Education in a document they use to get money or relief from regulations that they're doing Y, they're doing Y. Because it would be a crime to lie to the U.S. Department, but it's not a crime to lie to you. So we're going to look at what your state told Washington. Now, Common Core is not a new event, but we're not going to be here all night, so we're going to give just a very brief history. In 1989, Bush the Senior was president, and there was a summit meeting with President Bush the Elder and the National Governors Association, who at the time was chaired by a man named William Clinton. And that summit broke the whole concept of local control and said that we were going to establish national education goals. So the federal government was going to begin to dictate. That summit led to legislation when Mr. Clinton became president called Goals 2000. And Goals 2000 was the legislation that said the state had to set standards, they had to do assessments, they had to measure students against the standards, and that the schools would have repercussions if they didn't measure up. That met in the 1990s with a storm of protest. And so Goals 2000 didn't have any teeth in it. There was no timeline for the schools to meet those standards. That changed in 2001 when Bush the Jr. was in office with the passage of No Child Left Behind. The federal government has no role constitutionally in education. If you pick up the U.S. Constitution and you read it, you won't find the word education. So how did the federal government get around that? They made money available. They started to put together grant programs and offered boatloads of money to the states and said, did you want the money? Well, if you want the money, you have to do this. Legally, therefore, the states were volunteering for the money, which got around the prohibition. The first huge money pool drop was called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It happened in 1965. Lyndon Johnson was president. The federal government made money available and started to pull the states in. When the federal government makes money available by legislation, all of that legislation, no matter what the specifics are, says this much money will be available for this much time. And when the time is up, the money flow ends and the program ends. Or the federal government can reauthorize the program. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act has been reauthorized multiple times since 1965. The 2001 reauthorization was called No Child Left Behind. So No Child Left Behind is a continuation of a funding stream that actually began in the 1960s. What did No Child Left Behind say? It said that the states had to set content standards and achievement standards that would be applied to all the public schools and children in math, reading, and science. It said that the state had to set 3 levels of achievement, advanced being what you think, proficient, which would be passing. If you're proficient, you passed, and basic, which means you know something, but you're really not where you need to be. If I was going to make that a letter grade, it would be a C-. The state had to measure performance against those standards, and every year they had to get closer to showing the federal government that all of the children in the state were going to be proficient. And there were benchmarks. This year, this many, and then the next year, this many, and the next year, this many, and the numbers moved depending on your district, so the percentages were different. That movement was called adequate yearly progress. If you've been involved at all, you hear about AYP. AYP is adequate yearly progress. It comes from federal law. How did the districts measure it? They had to set up an assessment, a state test in math and reading and then science, and that was the instrument that the federal government was going to use to say, are you meeting these benchmarks? And No Child Left Behind told the states that by the close of the 2013-2014 school year, the one that just ended, every state had to show that 100% of the children were proficient in math and reading and science. Every child had to make the grade. But the states could define proficient however they wanted. Now, can you prove that 100% of your children are proficient? It's kind of an impossibility. But the states were being told they had to meet it. So what did they do? Well, let me show you. Stand up. Wiggle around while you're exercise with you. Okay, this is vocal performance. When you can meet the standard, you can sit down. But you can't sit down until you meet the standard. Are you ready? Luciano Pavarotti. Anybody who can sing like Pavarotti can sit down. Soloist with the New York Metropolitan Opera. Chorus member with the New York Metropolitan Opera. Soloist with the Regional Symphony. Chorus member with the Regional Symphony. Soloist with the church choir. Sings in the church choir. This is a very non-musical group. Sings in the shower and enjoys it. Can't carry a tune in a bucket. Can't find the bucket. Now, you have to demonstrate that 100% of the students are proficient. But you can set proficient wherever you want. Where would you set proficient? Where did you all sit down? And sings in the shower and enjoys it. I'm a teacher in a classroom. There is no incentive whatsoever for me to have one child take one step beyond the definition of proficient. Where am I going to spend all my time? With Mr. and Mrs. our two lovely can't carry a tune in a bucket up here. Getting them up to sings in the shower and enjoys it. Now there were a couple can't find the buckets. What happens to them? The teacher will ignore them. And in fact, what the research says is that teachers focus on the children immediately above the standard and immediately below the standard to get everybody to the standard.
How long have they been on that agenda for?
No Child Left, 2001 was when No Child Left Behind was passed. So the kids at the bottom kind of get ignored. What about the children at the top? Well, the child for whom the standard should have been Pavarotti walked into the classroom already able to sing in the shower and enjoy it. So that child, they already met the standard. They're forgotten. But it's a silent forgetness because they passed the test. They'll show up as a success on the test, even though education actually didn't meet their needs. And the research shows that as well. Now, kind of interesting when it's vocal performance. But what happened to states across the country when they had to do this in math and reading? In New Jersey, you have a summary, and your 2013 assessment results said that 70.5% of the students were proficient in English, and 11% were advanced. So that's like 81, 82% when you add them together. In math, 38% were proficient and 31% were advanced. So again, we're looking at 69%. So your state said, according to the state assessment, this is how many children met the standard. What happens when we compare that standard to an outside audit? The U.S. Department of Education gives what's called the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's a national achievement test. It's given every other year in all of the states. It's given in grades 4 and grade 8, and some states do it in high school. So we're going to take, since we just looked at your 8th grade assessment, in 2013, when your children took the state assessment, your state assessment said 81.9% were either proficient or advanced. When those same children in the same year took a reading test, which should be on the same material, but they were scored by the NAEP, only 47% passed. Well, either you're reading at the 8th grade level or you're not reading at the 8th grade level. So the numbers should be the same. So what does that say to you? Well, it says to you that the New Jersey Department of Education put the passing standard at sings in the shower and enjoys it. Because look how many more children passed. But when they took a test that the department didn't control, they didn't pass. Well, what about math? This is the NAEP in math. And in New Jersey, your state assessment, which we looked at right off of your state website, said 69.3% passed when those same children, same grade level, same year, took the math test given by the NAEP, only 49% of them passed. Either you can do 8th grade math or you can't do 8th grade math. So when the state set, remember you could set proficient wherever you wanted, New Jersey lowered the bar so that people would pass. Now, as a parent, what information did you get? You got a little piece of paper that said, congratulations, Johnny is proficient. Did it tell you what proficient meant? No, it did not. Is New Jersey alone? No, it is not. This is, in New Jersey, before we get to the national, New Jersey said that you were last in the achievement gap. In other words, the difference between the top and the bottom in New Jersey was a really big problem. And so part of the reason that you were doing Common Core and the big white sheet that you see on this side, this is your, where I took the language from, is your request for a waiver from No Child Left Behind. So it's what you told the federal government when you were looking for regulatory relief. And you said, well, we've got all these kids that the achievement gap is so high. You also said that of your kids who graduate from high school, 90% of them need remediation. Of the ones going to community college. What about the ones going to private colleges or four-year colleges? And if they're graduating from high school and your states are saying, your state assessment is saying that 69 plus are proficient or advanced, how can it then be that when they get to college, 90% need remediation? Can't be both. You are not alone. This is from the National Center for Education Statistics. They're an arm of the federal government. They collect data. That's what they do. The brown bar at the top is the achievement level that you would have to attain to get a score of proficient in the National Assessment for Educational Progress. The blue bar in the middle is the achievement level you would have to attain to be considered basic, number C-, in the National Assessment. And anything below that middle blue bar, you failed the national assessment. The little red flags are where every state defined proficient. Not one state defined proficient at the same level that the national assessment defined proficient. Only 8 states defined proficient at the level that the national assessment would call basic. And 42 states defined proficient at a level of achievement that the national assessment would call failing. But nobody knew that. Nobody knew that. Now, sometimes it's sadly amusing. I travel in many states, and when I went to Maryland and looked at their state numbers, their website actually says that in Maryland, the Department of Education sat down and they set the level of proficient where every child could reach it. And all my kids went, why didn't you send me to school there, Mom? Jeez. But that didn't help you at all. But these kids eventually went to college. And by 2010, the National Center for Public Policy and Higher Education published a study saying that nearly 60% of America's first-year college students need remediation when they get to college. But No Child Left Behind was passed in 2001. This is 9 years later, where we were supposed to have these standards, and it was supposed to raise achievement and get rid of the achievement gap, and everybody was going to be accountable. But since what the government did was mandated impossibility and said, if you don't do the impossible, you're going to be punished, the states did what they felt they had to do to make it look like they were doing the impossible. Let's move it to healthcare because it'll be really easy. Achievement standard. Everybody has to have this blood pressure. Can I do that? I'm a doctor. I am told if all of your patients do not have the proficient blood pressure level, you will be punished as a physician. You might lose your license. But you can set the acceptable blood pressure level wherever you want. Where's he going to put it? At 340 over 280. So everybody meets it. That's what happened here. The federal government said to the states, you have to prove that every child is proficient. If you don't, you're going to be punished. But you can define proficient however you want. So what did the states do? They lowered the bar. Why didn't you know? Because in this system, the State Department of Education sets the standards, oversees the delivery of curriculum, writes the test, sets the passing level, administers the test, scores the test, and then reports on its own results. If you were a bank, would you give a business a loan based on that kind of information? No. But that's the only information you get as parents on how well the schools are doing. Until our children get to college. And now they all need remediation. Because all the colleges didn't lower the bar. So kids who scored proficient and you thought everything was going swimmingly get to college and they're not ready to take calculus. And so it's slowed down. Well, this is a problem. Was the response to say, we actually need to think about this? Can we make education like manufacturing, where all the children will be quality checked, and they all come off the assembly line looking the same? Is it working? We've been doing it for 9 years by this point. It doesn't seem to be working. Should we go back to the drawing board and think again? No, that was not the response. Into the gap stepped people like Bill and Melinda Gates. This is actually from their foundation, and what you are looking at is a grant that they gave to the James B. Hunt Institute for $2.2 million. They gave it in 2008. In that year, the income of the James B. Hunt Institute, as reported on their audited financial statements, was $2.5 million. So if I give you $2.2 million of your $2.5 million, are you going to be very open to what I have to say? Probably. What was the money for? The money was so that the Hunt Institute would promote the broad adoption of rigorous, internationally benchmarked standards. Rigorous. Every time you hear about Common Core, you hear rigorous. It's a marketing technique. They never don't say it, and they never use a synonym. So that when standards, rigorous pops into your head. Kind of like if I say, we are farmers, you say, bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum. It's a marketing technique. We're going to look at the definition of rigorous tonight. What did the Hunt Institute do? What the Hunt Institute did, go ahead, was they created a newsletter called Blueprint. This is the first edition, in which they said they were partnering with Achieve and some other organizations to explore the potential for a common core of standards. Here's where the word first surfaces. So are we going back and saying, does standards-based education work, and can we mandate achievement, and should we look at this again? No. We're just going to centralize the standards. We're grabbing control so that instead of the states doing it, there'll just be one set of standards. And the Hunt Institute was the marketing agent, and they were partnering some other organizations to do it. Go ahead. The Gates Foundation continued to fund them. This is the money that they gave to the Hunt Institute between 2009 and 2013. You can see in 2009 they get $5.5 million to support states seeking to rapidly implement the Common Core. People wonder, why did we move so fast? Because there was money if you moved fast. The goal was to centralize as quickly as possible. So this moved at lightning speed. And it was a combination of marketing and then federal pushback. And we'll look at the federal side in just a minute. The Hunt Institute responded to the additional money. This is the second issue of their newsletter. And they said, all these organizations are expressing support for these new Common Core standards. And then they list all these organizations. So I looked up how much money each of those organizations get from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. 25 million, 10 million, 11 million, 37 million, 24 million, 11 million, 4 million, 4 million, and 11 million. The school principals in that time period got zero. Prior to that, they did receive money, but then their bylaws changed so they don't take outside money. So the Hunt Institute, which receives money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, says all of these organizations are calling for the Common Core state standards, and all of those organizations receive money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and then the Hunt Institute responds to their call to push the development of the Common Core standards. So it was a marketing circle. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation pushed every single piece of the circle. Interestingly, Mr. Gates, this is from September of 2013, he actually was interviewed by the Washington Post, and he said, well, it would be great if it worked, but we won't know for a decade. So it's an experiment. Mr. Gates' children go to a school that doesn't do Common Core. So it's okay to experiment on your kids, but not his. This year, the Gates Foundation, actually, there was a press release, and the article's also in the Washington Post. I didn't get time to put it into this. I just found it, so it's not in the presentation, but you can look it up. In which he talked about Microsoft is saying, well, all the schools need all this new technology. In order to be able to give the tests, you need the latest platform. So if you have XP, well, we're not really going to be supporting that anymore, so the schools will need to get to 8.1, and they'll all need headphones, and they'll all need new monitors that can support 8.1, and just as a side note, Mac products won't work. It actually says that. So people wonder why the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation spent $200 million. Think about how much Microsoft is going to make as all the schools move to all these computerized testing and curriculum. Oh, you're right there. Okay, Achieve, remember we looked at in that very first edition of the newsletter that the Hunt Institute was partnering with Achieve. Achieve has received millions of dollars from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and their website says that they're transforming this idea of the standards from a radical proposal into a national agenda, and their website says they were doing all of this at the direction of 48 states. That is not true. Not one single state legislature passed one single piece of legislation authorizing Achieve to develop standards that would be mandatory for the children of that state. Not one single state legislature appropriated one single penny to Achieve for the purpose of developing standards that would be mandatory for the children of that state. This was not led by the states. It was fed to them. As the standards were being written, people started to say, well, who's writing them? Where are they coming from? And originally there was no information given, and that created an outcry. So in July of 2009, the National Governors Association issued a press release. It's on the left, printing is small, so I retyped on the right, saying, well, the standards are being written by what is called a development work group. There are 29 people. The press release said they were content experts from Achieve, from the ACT, and from the College Board. Do you see classroom teachers in there? Neither do I. There weren't any. Neither were there any freshman-level college professors who teach freshman-level English or math. Now, if you wanted to know what would it take to make you be able to succeed in a freshman-level English class, wouldn't you think you'd ask somebody teaching it? But they did not. In fact, the architect of the Common Core State Standards is a man named David Coleman. If you've been involved at all, you've heard his name. Mr. Coleman actually applied for a teaching job in the New York City public school system. They declined to hire him. This is a man who couldn't get a job teaching in America's public schools. The press release went on to say that the work group's deliberations will be confidential. That means secret. We don't know who picked the members of the work group. We don't know why those people were selected. We don't know who in the work group did what. We have no minutes of their meetings. We don't know what they looked at or considered, what rubrics, what was the stand, how did they evaluate these standards. We have no information whatsoever about anything that they did. The standards were developed in secret. The press release went on to say that there were two other groups. The second group was a feedback group, and when you debate this across the country, you get told, well, no, see, there were teachers involved, and then you get lists. They sat on the feedback groups. The feedback groups could make suggestions, ask questions, but as the press release said, the feedback group was advisory, not decision-making. The work group was decision-making. You know, I have 6 kids. They're all girls except for 5 of them. It's an IQ joke. How fast did you get it? And when they were little, many nights they would say, hey, Mom, can we have a treat? On any given night, I could say no. I didn't have to give a reason, and my word was final. The feedback group was the children, and the work group were the parents. The feedback group could ask for anything, but the decision of the work group was final, and they didn't have to give a reason. Finally, there was a validation committee. There were originally 30 people on it, and they were supposed to be experts across their fields. They were supposed to say, are these really benchmarked? Are they research-based? In the end, only 25 of the original folks signed the document. The response was to just remove the names of the people who didn't, to make it look like it was unanimous, even though it wasn't. 2 of the members, Dr. Sandra Stotsky, who is from the state of Massachusetts, and Dr. James Milgren, who actually has taught math at Stanford University for several decades, publicly talked about their concerns with the process. They asked questions, they wrote a critique, and after it was done, they called back in and said, why wasn't anything that we wrote included? And the staffer said, well, we didn't get it. So no minority report was ever issued. Anybody who didn't agree was just erased. This is actually the Common Core website. The Common Core standards are copyrighted. You get a license to use them. And everybody has to acknowledge that the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices and the Council of Chief State School Officers, both of which are Washington, D.C.-based nonprofits, have to be acknowledged as the sole owners and developers of the Common Core state standards. Now, if these were actually developed by the states with taxpayer dollars, then they would be publicly available in public domain, because you own them, you're the public. These are privately developed and privately owned, except if a state uses them. And if a state uses them, they don't have to tell anybody that they're actually owned by 2 private organizations. Which is why your state they didn't say that on any of their documents. They made it look like they were written here, but they weren't. At the end, you can ask me anything you want, but let me get through it because I might answer you. Well, you can't ask me my weight. I'll just put that right in. The website has some other information. Don't do it yet. Have you ever bought a car? Now, you can go to the manufacturer and you can buy a brand new car that has that bumper-to-bumper 100,000-mile, 10-year warranty. Well, maybe you can't afford that. So you go and you buy the dealer's last year's car that has the balance of the warranty. Well, maybe you can't afford that. So you go and you buy a slightly older car that has a dealer's warranty. 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, the transmission. Maybe that's out of your reach too. So you buy the oldest, most dilapidated cars. For most of us, that was our first car. My youngest son is a junior in college, and this summer he was so proud he bought his very first car ever. It was $850. Mother helped with tax and license and insurance, but he paid the $850. And you know that car. It's the one that as soon as you sign it on the sticker on the car, it says, as is. In other words, you're going to sign it. You might not be able to drive it off the lot, but that's not their problem. The Common Core website says that the Common Core state standards are provided as is, just like the oldest, most dilapidated cars. It goes on to say that the owners of the Common Core state standards accept no responsibility or liability for anything that happens to any school or any child as a result of the implementation of these standards, and that anybody who uses them waives their right to seek redress from any harm that will come as a result of these standards. So they don't stand behind their product even to the same extent that Sears stands behind a power tool. Did anybody notice? Yes, this is from the Washington Post. It was written by two early childhood educators talking about how the standards, when they looked at it, nobody involved in the development of the standards was a K through 3 professional. They said, when the first draft came out, it looked like the people who wrote these standards don't know anything about how you teach small children. They said they're not research-based. They keep saying they're research-based. They're not research-based. When something is research-based, it looks like this. You should sit in front. I'm going to use you as an example all night. So I developed this, and I say, could you test it? And you say yes. And then I call you back. Did you like it? What worked? What didn't? Do you have suggestions? Do you have comments? And I incorporate that, or not. And then I do it again. When it's research-based, there's a loop in it. If you've ever been involved in any kind of gaming, it's called a beta test. It means it's the one that's not final. But the Common Core state standards, remember, they were just dumped in the market as is. There's no loop. There's no opportunity for anybody using the standards to go back to the developers and say, this worked or this didn't. So they can't be research-based because they didn't do any research. The Common Core folks said they received 10,000 public comments. They made public 24 out of 10,000. And the 24 that they made public all were in favor of the standards. Does that mean nobody was against them? No, actually a statement against the early childhood standards was signed by more than 500 early childhood professionals, including teachers and psychologists and pediatricians and researchers and child development experts. The statement said that the signers had grave concerns about the standards for young children, that the standards conflicted with research in cognitive science, in neuroscience, in child development, and in early childhood education, about how young children learn, about what they need to learn, and about how to teach them in kindergarten and the early grades. Among the 500 signers were the 3 past presidents of the National Association for the Education of Young Children, which is considered the foremost authority in America on how little ones learn. 11 copies of the statement were hand-delivered to the work groups. They were ignored. And when the standards finally came out, Dr. Carla Horwitz, she's from the Yale Child Study Center, said many of the most experienced teachers of early childhood little ones are just giving up in despair because these standards will hurt children. In fact, in the state of New York, a social worker actually testified in front of the New York Senate Education Committee and said that her caseload has more than doubled and she has 6-year-old children cutting themselves because of the pressure brought by these inappropriate standards. Remember we said the federal government had a role. Now if you think about this, at the beginning we talked about Bush the elder, and then we talked about Mr. Clinton, and then we talked about Bush the junior, so we have a D, an R, a D, an R, and now we get to Mr. Obama, who's a D. So this is a bipartisan insanity. There are people on both sides of the political aisle who are fighting for this, and people on both sides of the political aisle fighting against this. In fact, I got a call from a state rep in another state who called me and said, this morning I got a call from the president of the teachers union and the president of the Tea Party group, and when they agree with each other, I think I should listen. So I called you to tell me what's going on here. Because those two people almost never agree. What did the Obama administration do? When the administration came into office, the first thing that they did was, remember the stimulus bill? The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and you all heard about the shovel-ready projects. Inside that bill was a $53.6 billion appropriation to the United States Department of Education. It was called the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. Race to the top, go ahead. Race to the top was one piece of that big package. Race to the top was only a little over $4 billion of the $53 billion. Before the states could even apply for Race to the Top, they had to apply for the stabilization money. And to get it, they had to say that they were making progress toward those rigorous, there's that word again, standards, and that they would establish a pre-K to college and career data system. Those two things were mandatory. When the federal government writes grants, and I was one of the people who used to read these grants, and they really want you to do it, they give you a sheet. And you just, the governor or the, whatever, the secretary or commissioner, it's different in every state, signs it. That way they're sure that everybody's agreeing to the same thing in the same way. And it's called an assurances sheet. This is the assurances sheet that came with the stabilization fund. And in the assurances, the states had to say that they would establish a longitudinal data system that included the elements in the America Competes Act. That's federal legislation. So the federal government has been driving the data system, and the states, to get this money, had to say that they would establish one. States, well, what does that mean exactly, and what do we do? So the feds had training sessions. This is actually the documents from the training session on how to do statewide longitudinal data system, that's SLDS. And they said, the feds, that the system had to connect early childhood, post-secondary, and labor data. So it starts with little kids and it follows you all the way into the workforce. The data had to connect teachers and students. It had to make the data available to researchers and to public stakeholders. Now, there's federal legislation called the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act that protects the privacy of data. The Obama administration rewrote the regulations around that and basically removed any of the prohibitions. So now the regulations say that anyone with a legitimate educational interest can have access to the data. How do you know someone has a legitimate educational interest? They sign a form and tell you that they do. And that's all they have to do, and that includes vendors. The data has to be able to cross state lines. How can data cross state lines? If you've ever done any kind of computer coding, that means every state has to be using the same code numbers for the same data elements. So there's really one data system that is being implemented across the states. Because if every state had different numbers for each of these things, then if you moved, there's not a way for it to collate. So if the only way it can cross state lines is if every state is doing it the same. What are the elements? This is right from the America Competes Act. Number 1 is enrollment, number 7 is transcript, and that sounds really innocuous until you think about all the things you tell the school when you enroll your child. Who do they live with? Where do you live? What's their birth date? You give them vaccination records. If they're asking about free or reduced school lunch programs, they might ask for your IRS tax returns. Transcript information. Every single thing that happens in the school, including disciplinary records. I live in Pennsylvania. Last year, in our state, we had a 7-year-old who was eating a Pop-Tart. And he took a couple bites of the Pop-Tart, and he said to the teacher, "Oh, don't you think this looks like a mountain?" And the teacher decided it looked like a gun. And she was so afraid of the Pop-Tart that they suspended the little one, and his disciplinary record says terroristic threats. Because you know Pop-Tarts are dangerous things. And that's on his record. I don't know how a 7-year-old can be a terrorist. If your child breaks a law, the criminal justice system seals the records at the age of 18. But if they do it in the school, it's in their disciplinary record, and it's not sealed. So your children don't have the same rights as felons. There's a number for every teacher. State assessment scores are included. Every child has a unique identifying number. Once they have it, it follows them forever. And the data has to be able to be shared from preschool through college. The feds call it a P through 20 system. If you look at the little box, let's see if I can get in the thing, this little box right here that says K through 12, that's where we started. Then you have the middle box, the one that says 09 funding, just at the top. That included college and early education. With the stimulus funds, you went to the big box, and you see it includes labor data, it includes your financial records and your health records. In Tennessee, they actually call it a 360-degree picture of the child. P through 20. That's what the official name of the system is. P is preschool. K through 12 is what you think. 13, 14, 15, 16 is college. 17, 18, 19, 20 is anything you do after college. New Jersey applied for and received $1.3 billion in stabilization money. So did you implement the data system? Yes, you did. Because otherwise, remember, you had to do an assurance saying if you wanted the money, you had to do this. You received $1.3 billion. You did implement the data system. You also applied for Race to the Top. This is your grant application for Race to the Top signed by your governor and your commissioner and the president of your state board. Now, this is a very unusual grant application because most of them, when you do a grant to the federal government, it will include the line that says, "To the best of my knowledge and belief, everything is true," just like your IRS tax form. But the Race to the Top grant application also included the line that each of the signers had to say, "I certify that I've read this, that I'm committed to it, and I will support its implementation." It doesn't say, "if we get the money." You didn't promise to do it if you got the money. You had to promise to do it, to apply for the money. So you wonder why your governor is, we have to, because he signed it. He promised the feds he would do it. That's part of your application process. What did your application process say? Well, in the data system, you said that your data system was called New Jersey Smart, and when this application was written in 2009, you had 7 of the elements, but by 2012, you would have all of the 12 elements. You said your student identification numbers began in 2007, and even when this grant was written, you had 1.6 million kids in the data system from preschool through high school. So you were collecting before the K through 12 threshold. You said that you were going to include enrollment and demographic information. You were collecting information from the homeless Title I programs, supplemental education services, that you were going to be basically expanding the data system. You went on to tell the federal government that in addition to your assessments and your college board scores, you were collecting surveys of post-secondary plans and remedial course enrollment in colleges, and that you were collaborating so that you could integrate data from students served by the Department of Corrections, the Juvenile Justice Commission, the New Jersey Department of Human Services, the Department of Children and Families, and workforce data from the Department of Labor. Is that a 360-degree picture? Yes, it is. It's not just education data. All of the agencies in your state are integrating their data into one data system. And once your child has a number, all of that information is accessible about your child. Now, sometimes families have issues, and they avail themselves of assistance from perhaps a mental health facility, perhaps another helping agency. Do you really want that to be part of your child's record forever? Sometimes children make mistakes. I mean, I look back to some of the things I did when I was 7 and think, I'm really glad nobody knows that, because it was stupid, because I was 7. You probably have those things too. Do you really want them to be part of your permanent record now? But it is, because once it's in the data system, it stays in the data system. Your state said that under Race to the Top, you would expand your accountability system and you would make sure that every teacher has access to the data systems at school and at home. But we're going to protect the privacy of data? I'm sure no teacher would willingly, but honestly, if you can access it at home, it's not very private.
I'm a teacher, I don't have access to any of that stuff. That's not true.
It is true. It's what you may not have accomplished it yet, but your state told Washington that that's the plan.
Yeah, but just because they said it doesn't mean it's true. I have absolutely no information like that.
Okay.
I have a little bit where they live, their phone number. I mean, I'm not seeing any of that stuff.
However,
It's not
it
implemented
is the
yet.
plan for implementation. Even if they haven't gotten there yet, this is what they say and what they promised Washington they would in fact do. So just because everybody hasn't finished the plan doesn't mean it's not the plan, because you signed a contract and took money saying it was going to be, in fact, the plan. You also said you were going to expand the data sets to generate a much more comprehensive picture of student and school performance. Go ahead. You said you would provide a data mart containing de-identified data to deliver data extracts to researchers. So your data would go to researchers, and what you would do is pull the student identification number off, and that would make it de-identified. So your state promised that you would in fact make data available to researchers, and it would include, in what you called a data mart, student biography and demographics, all assessments, results, and student work. If you know their biography and demographics, can you find them? Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. You promised 2 things. You promised the state longitudinal data system, and you promised, this is the second, we're going back to your assurances page, go ahead, and you promised that you would move toward implementing the standards. So how did you do that? Well, the federal government once again held training sessions for the states on how you implement the standards. This is from the U.S. Department of Education in November of 2009. And what they said was, it's cradle to career education. It's funny, in the 1990s, what they used to say was, we want every child to come to school ready to learn. And what parents said was, well, how would you know if they were, how can you do that if you're not in the homes of preschool children? And everyone was assured that would never happen. But now it's called cradle to career education. And what they say is, you have to adopt the standards, and you have to use the assessments. And what you hear when you debate this is, this isn't curriculum. If I control the standard, and I control the test, I control curriculum. And the federal government told them that all the way back in 2009. You must align your instruction to the standards. A standard that doesn't have aligned curriculum is not worth the paper that it's written on. If the standard is everybody has to know their times tables, and you walk into my classroom, what would you expect to see? Times tables. In this case, the standards are, there's hundreds of them and they're very specific. So let's say that the standard is everybody has to make a chocolate cake that tastes just like my chocolate cake and has the same texture as my chocolate cake. And the assessment is, I'm coming to taste your cake. How many recipes can there be? 1, because if you change anything, it won't taste like this cake. The feds told them that at the very beginning. You have to use the Common Core standards. Your state actually has joined a testing consortium, so you're using the same tests. Well, if you don't teach the same curriculum, you won't pass the test. And it hasn't been a secret, all the way back from the very beginning. There's been some pushback at the federal level. This is actually a bill that was introduced in the U.S. House. It was called the Student Success Act. And when a bill is introduced, because they don't read the whole bill, they do like cheat sheets on the bill. So this is from the Republican Study Committee, and it said, well, it's a carrot and stick for Common Core. The carrot was race to the top money. If you want race to the top money, you have to implement Common Core. The stick was No Child Left Behind. Because remember, No Child Left Behind said 100% proficiency, and if you don't reach it, there'll be punishments. So the states were asking for waivers. They were asking to get out of that 100% level. Okay, but then you have to do what the feds say. So No Child Left Behind was the stick. Most states did both. They reached for the carrot of race to the top, and we just saw that you did. They also tried to avoid the stick of No Child Left Behind. Now, the feds knew that they were using it as a stick. This is from Education Week. Arne Duncan, who is the U.S. Secretary of Education, talked about how the states were all asking for waivers. And he said, yeah, we'll give you a waiver, but it will have strings attached. You'll have to do the federal policies if you want a waiver. So the feds knew that they were using it as a stick. New Jersey also applied for flexibility, and it says ESEA flexibility. Why? Because remember, No Child Left Behind is the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So it's underneath, it's always ESEA. You applied for flexibility. Here's your flexibility request. It was dated in November of 2011. And you had two choices for the first option. You could adopt the Common Core standards, which your state did. Or you could say that you were going to have your own standards and the colleges were going to come together and write standards. But if you adopted your own standards, you would have to attach a memorandum saying that all of the children who tested proficient would not need any remediation in college. But if you adopted the Common Core state standards, you didn't have that requirement. They could still need remediation. That requirement didn't exist. So you could either do the Common Core, or you could apply for a waiver from 100% proficiency by promising 100% proficiency. Not surprisingly, pretty much all the states picked option A, as did you. In your flexibility request, you said that you were going to move toward the curriculum that was a model curriculum. So the state's very open about the fact here in New Jersey that there will be a model curriculum aligned with the Common Core state standards and the universal design for learning. And then all the districts will use that. And it will be led, this development will be led by the chief academic officer of your state, working with the directors of special ed and ELLS and math and reading. There's a reason that you're working with the director of special ed. Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, is actually a special ed model. Most of you, if I take any population of 100 people, about 80 to 85 of you will be what are called visual learners. How do you know you're a visual learner? I'm going to read you something and you're going to say, can I see that? I'd really rather read it myself. I'm going to tell you a phone number and you're looking for a pen because you want to write it down. That's a visual learner. Most people are. It is the most efficient way to learn. And so that's how most people learn. Of the people who are left, about half of them are auditory learners. They'd rather hear it first. That doesn't mean that they don't learn visually, but they would prefer to hear it. My daughter, we homeschooled her for high school, and she always liked me to walk her through things first. She's an auditory learner. She's also a professional dancer. She makes her living listening to and interpreting music. So of course she's an auditory learner. It matches her career. Of the people who are left, they don't learn very well visually, and they don't learn very well auditorially. So you have to find another pathway in. Those pathways are not as efficient. Sometimes we use tactile senses. We make them, we use like write in sand so they can feel the letters. You may make them write it on your back. Universal Design for Learning is a scaffolding method. It gives extra support to kids who don't learn the way that ordinary kids learn. So you might see, when you do that, we're going to read a story, and before we read it, I'm going to walk through all the vocabulary words for you, and I'm going to tell you who the characters are. And I'm going to give you questions to think about while you're reading it. And then while you're reading it, I'm going to stop in between and make sure you haven't gotten lost. And I'm going to give you alternative methods to test. Did you ever see The Blind Side? The movie The Blind Side? Remember the kid that the social studies teacher brought him in and read him the test and explained the words? Because that was called scaffolding. We're helping him because he couldn't do it the normal way. Now, in his case, it was because of background and not ability, but it gives you an idea of what that looks like. UDL is a special ed technique, and for children who do not learn visually, this is a really good technique. It works really, really well. And thank goodness that it's there, because it helps us reach kids that need help. But why would we apply it to every child? Why would we make every classroom use UDL principles? It would be like, if you broke your leg, you need crutches. Good for you. Should we make the top runner on the cross-country team use them too? No, of course not. So this is saying, everybody learns the same way, and your state is saying, we're going to use this, and it's not just your state, they're all doing it, and structure our classrooms based on this. But it is not the most efficient way to learn, nor is it the most efficient way to teach. And when you try to structure everybody that way, it's not good for the kids who actually need it because you can't adapt the content, and it's not good for the kids who don't because it slows them down. While the standards were being developed, people started to get a look at them. This is from Mr. McCallum. He was one of the work group members, and he actually attended the National Conference of Math Educators, and they got a look at one of the drafts of the standards. They hated them. They said they were poorly written, they were too hard at the early grades, why are we in such a rush, this is too bureaucratic. And his response was to say, well, see, it's moving so fast because the federal government is forcing the states to adopt these to get Race to the Top money, sight unseen. Your Race to the Top grant application was signed before the final draft of the standards was available. So your state promised to implement standards that nobody had seen yet. He also told the educators, don't worry, because the math standards won't be too high, especially in comparison with other nations where math education excels. His words were echoed by Trevor Packer. Trevor Packer is the senior vice president of the College Board at an American Association of School Superintendents meeting. And Mr. Packer told the superintendents that AP Calculus sits outside the Common Core standards. That Common Core slows the math progression down. At the very beginning, we looked at that article. It was written by a man named Mark Tucker. Mr. Tucker is the chairman of a group called the National Center for Education and the Economy. They've been involved in this reform since the 1980s. And in May of 2013, they wrote a document called What Does It Mean to Be College and Work Ready? The document said it means being ready to be successful in the first year of a community college program. In math, that means middle school math and algebra no later than the end of your sophomore year in high school. Because the document said that since most community colleges start with Algebra 1, it would be kind of a waste to teach Algebra 2 to go to college and take Algebra 1. The document concluded by saying, yeah, we understand these are really low standards, but we really need to start here. Your state is a governing state in PARC, the Partnership for Assessment for Readiness in College and Careers. This is your, right from the PARC website, so you can see you're a governing state and you will be implementing the PARC tests. The PARC assessments are based on Common Core, and they give you a content framework. In other words, if you want to pass the test, this is what you need to teach. So I looked at the content framework. And the content framework says by grade 4, students need to be able to add and subtract using the standard algorithm. That's write the problem down and solve it. That used to be a grade 2 outcome. By grade 6, they need to be able to do long division correctly. That used to be a grade 4 outcome. However, the PARC website says that starting in grade 6, they can use a calculator when they take the math assessment. So they don't really have to learn to do it at all. Here in New Jersey, your State Department of Education put this letter out just this year, talking about how your PARC assessments are going to be what you're using for college graduation. And the math assessments would be Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. The letter goes on to say that you can satisfy the state requirements for graduating, and if you look at the very top of the math, by achieving a passing score on Algebra 1 or Geometry or Algebra 2. That doesn't say and. Pick one. If you pass one, you've met the requirement. Well, what did that National Center say? Algebra 1 by the end of your sophomore year, because most community colleges begin with Algebra 1, so why do you need Algebra 2 to go to college and take Algebra 1? Is that a good idea? You know, the U.S. Department of Education actually does study education issues. This is from Answers in the Toolbox. It was published in 1999. The department was looking for what led to success in college. And what they found was if a child gets past Algebra 2 in high school, they more than double their chances of getting a college degree. That study became part of what was called, what was called a meta-analysis done by Auburn University and published in 2004. A meta is where, instead of doing a study, the researchers look at all the studies that have been done in a particular topic, and then they put them together. So that, can you get trends? Did this study say something different than every other study? Usually 10 years is considered a reasonable meta. This group looked at 25 years worth of data. And what they found was as secondary math rose, the likelihood of degree attainment rose. The kids who took calculus were 28 times. I did not say 28%. I said 28 times. That's 2,800%. Not just to go to college and to get a degree, but to be a high achiever in college. Regardless of your race, your socioeconomic status, the kind of high school you went to, or the major that you took. Because the skills of higher math, being able to think logically and solve a problem and persevere, translate to every major. Now, does that mean every kid should go to college? No. Does that mean every kid should take calculus? No. But it does mean that we should be setting educational policies that are designed to give every one of our children every chance possible to get as far ahead as they can in math. Because math opens doors of opportunity, and Common Core closes them. How is it that the U.S. Department of Education in 2014 does not know what it did know in 1999? Well, maybe it's just math. No. This is English Language Arts, and I actually have attended Common Core training sessions, and this was one of the handouts. And what they say is, it's supposed to be close and thoughtful reading of the text, and they give you the Gettysburg Address and say, when you teach the Gettysburg Address, you are not supposed to ask the children why the North and the South were fighting. You are not supposed to ask them if they've been at a funeral. You are not supposed to ask them if equality is something worth fighting for. You're only supposed to talk about the words of the Gettysburg Address, which is sort of ironic, because the Gettysburg Address says, the world will little know nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. But you're not allowed to talk about what the guys did. You're only allowed to talk about what Lincoln said.
Where does it say that in that document? Is in that document it says that you can't do any prior background information?
Yes. And you can, if you pull up, afterward you can come up and look at the big one and see how they talk about it. And it's actually, if you go online and Google Common Core Gettysburg Address, you'll find a whole bunch of other teachers, because it's been used all over the country.
Yeah.
So you can go and find that as well. This is actually a Common Core Pearson company textbook, and I chose Pearson because they're the largest publishing house, and actually they have the contract to implement the PARCC test as well. So I bought the book. Here's the book. And here's the book. It's 12th grade literature book. Go ahead. Common Core edition. You can see it says Common Core edition. And on the first page of the children's book, go ahead, the very first thing that they tell the children is that every selection in the book is available in audio format, and they can get an audio summary of the book. So the first thing they tell the children is that they don't have to read any of the words in the book. They can just listen. And then they give them an audio Cliff Notes version. Now, if we're honest, we all use Cliff Notes. But good teachers put together activities that said you can't really do this unless I actually didn't want you to read Shakespeare. But the very first thing that this book says is that you don't have to read any of the words. Now, it's funny, I was in Tennessee, and the teacher said, well, no teacher would tell them that. Yes, but if you tell the children, every child will find it. Because it's the very first thing they tell the children. Teachers didn't tell us to use the Cliff Notes either, but we all did. And yet the publisher tells them that at the very beginning. I've actually read through the book. And in the book they give examples of, they have a section on antonyms, and they define antonyms as words that are different in meaning, and the example is admonish and calm. They're not antonyms. In the Canterbury Tales, they talk about how it's a frame. A frame is where you tell a big story, and then inside it you fit little stories. So the Canterbury Tales, the frame is all the pilgrims going on their pilgrimage, and then while they're traveling, each of them tells a little story. So it's a story within a story, that's a frame. And they ask the children to find other examples of frames, and the example that they give is the snowman from the Christmas show, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. That's not a frame. The snowman doesn't have a story. The snowman is just the narrator of Rudolph's story. So they don't get the basic information correct inside this book. One section talks about using, applying 19th century literature to how they interpreted that in 21st century technology, and the example is Frankenstein. And the children are supposed to read what the author of the book thinks about Frankenstein, and then what Mary Shelley thought while she was writing Frankenstein, and then they read a Saturday Night Live skit about Frankenstein. What did they not read? Frankenstein. They didn't read the book. They didn't read an excerpt. How can you think about how it's interpreted if you don't read it? And yet that's not included. In the park test, the children are allowed to take the spell checker when they take the test. But this is the writing test, and they can take it with the spell checker. Your Race to the Top application said that you will use school assessments that leverage technologies and adjust to each student's performance. That's while they're taking the test. So the test will change depending on how well or poorly you answer the questions while the child is taking the test, which means you may not be taking the same test that you took, but nobody will know. Your teacher evaluation system, this is from your flexibility request. Your teacher evaluation is student achievement is 50%, and 50% is what the teacher does in the classroom. So the assessment is 50%, and what the teacher does in the classroom is 50%. Go ahead. Except if the student, they have performance levels in the classroom, so that you get a scale for each of these tests. You either are distinguished or solid or moderate or partial or minimal. We're evaluating teachers based on if their children are distinguished or solid or moderate or partial or minimal. What's the difference between those? And who decides? In any given paper that may be read by any given evaluator. That puts teachers in an impossible place, because none of those are quantifiable. In fact, teachers' unions across the country are saying, wait, how can you evaluate teachers based on something like that? You have two different people reading the same paper. Are they going to give it the same scale? Did you ever watch the Olympics? Did you ever watch the ice skating? 9 different people watch the same athlete do the same performance at the same time and give it 9 different scores. Then how do we fairly evaluate teachers on a system that looks like this? They can get 4, 3, 2, or 1, and what I did was this is kind of small to see, so I'm going to make it bigger for you. The difference between 4, full comprehension of ideas, just comprehension of ideas, basic comprehension of ideas. How do the states evaluate this? They put ads in the paper, they bring in people who get minimal training, and then they read all the tests, and they're supposed to score a bunch of papers based on this. Now I will tell you, I used to judge forensics in my community. It's when the kids, they can debate, they can give speeches, they can recite poetry, they can do extemporaneous. It's all about public speaking. And I was sort of a martinet judge. You could get from 0 to 7. I don't know if you've ever heard junior high kids give a speech, but when junior high kids give a speech, some of them begin their sentence and then they close with them. And then they begin the next sentence, but you don't listen at the end. And then they begin the next sentence, but then you've lost them at the end. Because that's how they speak. And so I would grade them down for that. And then give them suggestions on how you could do it better the next time. And here's exercises you could do, and here's ways to think about it. And some junior high kids, when they make a speech, they stand in front of you and they go, and then he went to, because that's what you do when you're 12. And I would grade them down for that. With all the same thing. Here's ways you can think about it, ways you can improve it. And in one of the sessions, the person sitting beside me gave every child a 7. I said, you knew it was a competition, right? She said, but you know, they're all here, I want them all to feel really good. Okay, well, how do you know if your child's paper, or how does that teacher know if the children in her or his class's paper were scored by Miss Martinet or Miss Lucy-Goosey? You have no way to know that. That's subjective scoring. And yet we're making objective decisions on subjective data. Decisions that affect teachers' ability to continue working, decisions that affect children's promotion and graduation. Go ahead. And we're going to skip that same thing. In your state, this is from the Education Law Center, they've actually sued your state on testing issues and how they were invalid and reliable. And in May of 2014, they're talking about these new assessments that you're giving and how the state is planning to use the PARCC exams, your 1 of 9 tests, and how all of the state said everything was wonderful, but when this group surveyed New Jersey's principals and supervisors, 80% of them said they had some technology problems. And 90% said, yeah, we're a little nervous about this whole process here. The article went on to say at the top that the state is appropriating $10 per student for PARCC readiness. And the reason they gave $10 is because here in New Jersey you have a law that says that the state cannot give the districts unfunded mandates. So they made $10 per student available for readiness activities. The PARCC website says that just to give the tests, it costs $29.50. That doesn't include all the remediation and all the readiness. So the $10 was to get around the letter of the law. But that means all your districts are stuck. Where are they going to get the money? How are they going to pay for all of this? It's not just New Jersey. This is the new GED test, which is now Common Core compliant. The GED test now, they get a source text, and then they get a writing prompt. And they're graded on how well they write about the information in the source text. So the source text on global warming says the temperatures are increasing because of human industrial activity and population growth. Now, global warming is the source of one of the hottest debates, no pun intended, in American politics today, with people lining up on all sides of the fence, politically and scientifically. But the students only get one point of view, and then they're told to write a short essay in 10 minutes with a correct explanation of how human activity has directly contributed to the rise and concentration of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere, using multiple pieces of evidence from the text to support their answer. What if they didn't agree with that political point of view? They had better know all of the examples to support their answer out of their head, because they're graded on how well they support their answer with data. But they only got data from one side of the fence. It's like if you agree it's an open book test, but if you don't agree it's a closed book test. That's testing a political point of view. It's called English. And a GED test is used to determine who graduates, and what college they get into, and how big of a scholarship they get. This isn't testing, this is sorting. Go ahead. The source text, there's a social studies, it's an extended response section where they have to write a longer essay, and this is on social studies, and the question was, does foreign aid really help? And they give a great long dissertation on American foreign aid to Afghanistan, and go finish by saying, this is in fact what happened on 9/11 when terrorists from Afghanistan hijacked planes and carried out attacks on the United States. The terrorists were not from Afghanistan. They are from Saudi Arabia, and one was from Egypt. The information is false. But the children are sitting in a testing situation. They won't be screening to say, is it right or wrong? It'll just go into their heads because they're busy trying to think of the answer. And they're young enough that they don't remember. You know, these kids at GED, they're 17. They barely remember, if at all. So we just gave them false information. The test prompt said, should we continue giving aid to poor countries or stop giving aid, and then use details from the text to support your answer. But the text gave them wrong information, and then asked them to draw a conclusion based on information that wasn't accurate. Here in New Jersey, this is right from a newspaper article, a homeschool family has been ordered to follow the Common Core curriculum. A superintendent has interpreted the law to say that even if you homeschool, you must comply. Now, there's a lawsuit happening based on this, and I don't know how it'll turn out. But when they say all kids, they meant all kids here in New Jersey. The SAT test, Mr. Coleman, who was the architect of the Common Core state standards, went from student achievement partners to the College Board. And he said that one of his top priorities was to make the SAT reflect the new Common Core state standards. So they dropped the essay, they eliminated vocabulary, they removed the penalty for incorrect answers. Because they don't need these obscure words from literature. They just need college and career-ready words. And they dropped whole sections of the math test. Why? Well, remember, Common Core slows the math progression down. But if the SAT is still testing higher math, then the children will get a lower score. This isn't measuring the student against the standard, it's measuring the standard against the student, so that the scores will stay high. And in fact, the evaluators, this is from the National Review, said it's a dumbed-down version because they just dropped standards that were difficult for the students. When you look at this, it's a shame the kids don't read literature because 1984 talks about this. In 1984, Winston defies Big Brother, is eventually caught, and is put into a re-education system, and his interrogator's name is O'Brien. And O'Brien says, don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we'll make thought crime literally impossible because there'll be no words in which to express it. Every concept that can never be needed will be expressed by exactly one word, with its meaning rigidly defined and all its subsidiary meanings rubbed out and forgotten. Every year, fewer and fewer words, and every year the consciousness will be a little smaller. Has it ever occurred to you, Winston, that by the year 2050, no one will even understand this conversation that we're having today? Now, I always like to end with good news. This is my granddaughter. And why am I showing her to you? Well, she's adorable. But every one of you has a face that looks just like that in your life. That when you look at that face, it makes your heart sink. In Pennsylvania, the Department of Education testified in front of the Pennsylvania House Education Committee, talking about Common Core. And what they said was that just like widgets, all the schools need to make everyone to the same standard. They went on to explain that it's like McDonald's. If you go to a McDonald's in one city and buy a hamburger, and then you go to a McDonald's in another city and buy a hamburger, the hamburger's of the same quality, it's the same. So why can't our schools produce the same quality product? When did our children move from the client to the product of the educational system? Does anybody think that what we do to the ground meat at McDonald's is for the benefit of the ground meat? No, you do something to a product for a client. Well, if our children are the products, who's the client? At McDonald's, the first thing they do is make all the ground meat, sure, all the ground meat is identical. That's how they get the same product. They start with the same beginning. But our children aren't identical. And even if the teacher says the same thing in the same classroom at the same time to the 20 kids in front of her, they'll all hear something different. Because we all do. So you can't apply that model. This is a manufacturing model. But we're not here to manufacture children. That's not what education was supposed to be about. I get asked a lot, why are you here? Because the only way I can protect her is to let you know what's really happening. The worst thing that you can do is nothing. We say, that's awful. I'm so glad you're out there. Thank you so much. And I'm going to get home and forget it. That's the very worst thing that you can do. It almost doesn't matter what you do as long as you do something. You can and should be talking to all elected officials. There's an election a week from today. Make sure they hear from you. Every candidate and every official should be getting a phone call and a letter saying, where do you stand on this? I need a yes or a no. Whatever party you belong to, talk to your county and state committee. Where do you stand on this? You're supposed to represent my interests. Where do you stand on this? If your follow-up is no more money until I withhold all contributions until I get a response. They're supposed to represent you. You don't have to give them any money if they don't at least answer you. And then you can decide if you agree or not. They are your children. If you are not happy with what the school is doing, remove them from the school. The children don't belong to the schools, they belong to the parents. So if you are not happy with what's happening in your school, while you are fighting this, remove your children. If you can supplement what's happening in education, supplement. There are lots of curriculums available online that you can purchase, bring home, teach at home to make sure your kids can read and write and count. Get involved with other people. Have a Common Core party in your house. Invite your friends and neighbors in. There's things online, you can use one of my videos, but share the word. Put a Common Core sign in your yard and a bumper sticker on your car. You know, it's funny, when I travel, there's a lot of women involved in this. Standing up all over the country, it's women. And I get asked all the time, how come that's so many women? And I would say, well, you know, it's been said that fathers will die for their children, and God loves a gentleman, that's true, you will. Mothers will kill. There's no way that any mom or grandmom in this country is ever going to say, it's okay, you can have them. Not going to happen. But how fast we win depends entirely on you, on how involved you want to be, on how much you want to push back, on what it is you want to do about it. You know, I worked in the Reagan administration, and President Reagan once said that we're only ever one generation away from tyranny. It doesn't get passed in the bloodstream. We have to preserve it. We have to teach it. We have to defend it. So that we won't become the generation that tells our children about a United States where children used to be free. I have no intention of becoming that generation. I want her to grow up in a land that is free. I came here to tell you what's going on and to beg you to join me. Thank you very much. Now I understand that questions, if you, I think he's bringing the microphone around. What I'll ask each person to do is ask one until we get through, and then if you have a second one, you can, but that way I get as many people as possible in the time left.
All right, we'll start right up here. Any questions?
I think you have one right here.
Okay, I have a special ed fourth grader, multiple handicaps, 85 different diagnoses. They're, trying to hammer my square peg into one of 3 round holes that they have. None of them are suitable, but she's in an LLD class, language and learning disabled. And she has organic brain damage, so she doesn't, and she's too smart for the cognitive care class. She has emotional issues, but she's not violent, so she's not in the ED class, and so she's in the LLD class. Well, whatever. I did absolutely refuse to let her take the NJAS last year. There's no way. We looked at the sample test. I gave her the sample questions. She fell on the floor and was whining and crying and screaming. I was like, after the first test, she can't do it. She can't do it. It's way beyond her. I'm like, okay, so she's not, well, she had to miss 9 days of school. That's okay, because she has 13 different practitioners. And we filled it all up with medical excuses. No problem. This year, the park, I don't know when they're going to be giving the park. It's days and days and days and days and days. I don't know, she can't physically take it. She's visually impaired, she has CP. I looked at all the accommodations on the computer.
They don't fit.
Nothing fits, because basically, the accommodation would have to be, somebody will sit next to her and explain the question and reassure her and calm her down so that and wipe off her hands when her hands are pouring sweat and she can't keep her hands on it, and help her with the kids. That's not going to happen. So we're not going to take the park. What I want to know is, how on earth is this teacher assessed? She has 11 people in the class, 11 kids in the class. It's a 3rd and 4th grade class. So we could say maybe there's 5 kids. My child and 3 others I know of the 4th graders are not going to be taking the test. There's maybe 5 4th graders, maybe. How is this teacher assessed? What does this do to her? And what does the V2 refusal score that I got on the NJS do to this teacher? The teacher's doing the best she can.
The teacher's doing the best she can, and so are many teachers. My understanding, and I'm not, since I'm not an expert in what is specifically happening in every New Jersey school district, generally, if a child refuses the test, it is a non-score. And that's what generally holds up across state lines. That if they fill out one question and then stop, now they have a score. But if they refuse the test, it's a non-score. So it's that the teacher, there should be no repercussions for the teacher, is what should happen. And that's what's happening across the country. Now, here in New Jersey, your governor is, he's a cheerleader for this, so I'm not sure if he's going to try to push back on that, but across the country what we're seeing is if children refuse the test, it is not a failure, it's a non-score, so it shouldn't affect the teacher's evaluation. Now, we have some teachers in the room, so did you want to answer that, because you may know more than me?
Hi, my name is Lisa Brown. I'm a teacher at Southern High School. I actually opted my children out. I had nothing to take the math portion. I didn't mind that much, but the ELA one was too complex, and I didn't think it was appropriate, and the time frame was not appropriate.
Right.
So I decided to do that. Right now, the state as teachers are 35% of your evaluation is held to your scores, but it's not the park. We're not being held accountable for the park for, I think, 2 to 3 years at this point. But
10% of their evaluation comes from the park this year.
no.
I think it's changing from district to district, is what we're seeing, and
New Jersey's, the board of the New Jersey just put a hold on teachers. Now we can use our SGOs and this test we make ourselves, and that they're scored against us.
Right.
But they put a moratorium on holding the teachers accountable, the State Board of Education. So their school district's doing it, he's talking
The
about it.
SGP is the student score, and that counts as 10% toward our overall
Yeah.
evaluation, which is different.
So 10% is the park if the student score
Yeah.
counts.
Well, it's like, through all these acronyms, there's SGPs, SGOs, right?
I know, it's
We can't put them
ridiculous.
all. But that's what's happening. So, but I think to counter that this year, now they said, oh, now all kids have to take it. It's not technically counting for them until next year. But, they haven't quite said yet if it's officially going to be a requirement to get out of high school. It's been very vague. And they come out with things after very vaguely.
All right, can we take one at a time and use the mic?
Okay.
Because not everybody can hear.
I'm a high school guidance counselor in Atlantic County. I live here, and my children are in elementary school here at Stafford. The state just changed, and our district had a parent information meeting at back to school night, and our directors and principals were stating one thing when the state had told them, and I want to say maybe a week later, the information was changed.
Right.
So now we all thought that the scores were not going to count for the students taking it this spring. And in fact, they changed it and said that they will. And every state, this is what we were told so far, every state has to determine their proficiency level. And when will that happen?
After the test is done.
Exactly. When these juniors take it in the spring, and they get their scores whenever, maybe by October, in the summer, once the scores are there, they will determine what's proficient for each state.
And that's, it's not just your state. And they've been doing that. In New York, they changed the scores after the fact because they didn't like how many people were proficient. So the kids all got told, and then 3 months later, they got told, oh, no, you're not, because they didn't want that. And then they predicted with the new Common Core tests how many students would be proficient. Pearson actually set the standards and came in and did it, and then the people who, there were 95 evaluators, and they said we all knew it was fixed, like we had to comply.
And it's all about money, it's all about the big corporation like Pearson, and
Yeah,
it's
right now, I mean, I think the sad thing is, you're right. Your state is, like I've been here a couple of times, and every time I try to give you the most updated, which means I'm constantly changing the presentation because it changes. So they're pushing hard. The problem they're having with PARC nationally is last year when they did the field tests, they didn't do a very good job. And so they're having internal issues in PARC, which is creating, they can't implement as fast as they thought that they could because their field tests were so poorly constructed that they couldn't get all their pieces together. So everybody's kind of mushing around until they see what PARC does this year. Your state, as a governing state, is pushing, and because your governor is such a cheerleader, he's pushing PARC down your throat really, really hard. However, if your state codes allow opt-out, they can't deny you something that's in state code, and they can't punish a teacher for a parent exercising a right that you have by law.
Our superintendent, just to sum it up, keeps emailing us, and they're trying to ask the right questions to try, and he keeps saying, we are building the plane as we fly it.
Yes.
And that's exactly what's happening.
I know. I'm sorry that it's so confusing in your state, but it just is. Your state's a mess. Just like you looked at, well, we gave you $10 to get around the unfunded mandate, even though they knew that wasn't enough money. They did it so that the districts couldn't sue. That's why you got $10. So this is a manipulation from the beginning to force feed it down the throats of the parents and the teachers. The teachers are as stuck in this as the children. I just want you to know that. It's really easy. The teacher's your front line of, I'm going into the school district. I'm going to interface with the teacher. She's or he, my husband's a teacher, so I shouldn't just say he or she is as stuck as the parent. Everybody's kind of trapped in this and trying to make the best of it. So if you have a teacher who is pushing back, like, opting your kids out, so I'm sure when you close your classroom door, you're actually trying to do what works with your kids.
When I close my classroom door, these kids have to take this PARC test. So I'm coming in and I'm doing everything I can to get these kids the best grade they can on that PARC test. That's what I have to do with the teacher.
That's what you have. And yet I'm sure if you could, like, she's stuck too, because she has to teach to the test. No. No.
You study before you teach. You read, I'm a history teacher, so you always pull your pieces and you're getting them to read the textbook. Actually, I feel like I'm going back to the textbook a little bit.
All right, if we're going to speak, we have to use the mic. Is your administrator of this school or any school, is your administrator on board with Common Core, or does he know anything about it, or is he just going along with the program?
You need to remember that the superintendents work for the state in the district. They are the state's representative in your school district. Their certification says that they are there to implement in your district what the Department of Education says. They may be more or less excited about it, but that's what they're there to do.
If I want to opt out my son from this and we don't have an opt-out option, how do I go about doing this? And
stay home.
That's what I was going to do, to stay home.
Stay home. But that's a legislative issue that I would push in New Jersey with your elected officials. We want parents to be able to opt out of the test. In Pennsylvania, when they implemented this, a number of us got involved in just a pain in the neck, and we got our House of Representatives. There are 203 members in the Pennsylvania House. 203 members voted for it.
What's the repercussion? If I keep him home, is there going to be, is anything that happens with his record?
His attendance record will show up that he stayed home. Yeah.
Okay, I refused my kids last year. One goes to a special needs school. My daughter was in 5th grade.
I outright refused. Really got no feedback. I happened to have a teacher that educated our principal. Superintendent flat out told me my daughter would sit in stairs. I told her, if my daughter sits in stairs, the police will come in, I will call CPS, it's institutional abuse, you are not making my child sit for hours. You can't do it in preschool, you can't make a 4-year-old, sit for 15 minutes in timeout, so you surely can't do it to a 10-year-old. I had no feedback, had no idea what was going to happen to my daughter when she walked in. She is diagnosed ADHD with severe anxiety disorder, which was why I chose it. This child throws up every Thursday night before tests, let alone standardized tests. The morning of the test, her teacher texted me and said, letting you know she's down in the office, she's going to the kindergarten classroom that has special needs kids, and it was actually my daughter's 2nd grade teacher that was in this room. She helped the entire week. I will also tell you, if kids do not speak English, they don't take the test.
Really?
No, they don't. My daughter and another teacher's daughter were the only 2 kids in our district, which were Riverside, that refused. There was 27 other kids that did not take the test. All of them because they do not speak proficient English. Why are they excused? But my child...
But they won't be in the future.
Right.
That's what's sad.
But I'm just letting you know my experience. Refuse the test.
I just wasn't sure
The,
if he was accepting any discussions on that.
the more people who do it, the more likely you are to succeed. In New York last year, at final count, over 60,000 children, according to published reports, refused the test, including Rob Astorino's children. He's the guy running for governor. In New York, he's running against Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo is a Common Core cheerleader, so you've got Christie the Republican and Cuomo the Democrat. Astorino took a public position against Common Core and created a Stop Common Core ballot line to run on. He got over 100,000 signatures. This year, they're aiming at 250,000 children opting out of the test. So the bigger you get, the more likely you are to succeed. Band together. We have one more question because I'm looking at the clock. There's a guy right in the back. In a white shirt, right in front of me.
My name's Robert Goldberg. I'm from First Amendment TV. And on this past Tuesday, I filmed an event that was given by the NJSCERA. It was a statewide conference on Common Core, given by the state. Former Governor Kane was there, giving a lecture. So if you want to see the government side of promoting Common Core, you can go to my YouTube channel and see it. It's 2 hours and 50 minutes long. You can decide for yourself what they talk about. At that conference, they did not take any questions from the audience. They had some people, if you had a question, you had to write it in. It was basically a dog and pony show, but they don't go into detail on how good it is, like she goes into detail on how bad it is. I also have a few other presentations from Dr. Duke Presser that speaks about Common Core. You can see it on my channel also. If you don't remember the name, I have cards to give out to you later. But there's another thing I want to say to you people that have kids. How many of you go to the school board meetings? You need to get involved. A lot of those meetings, no one shows up. I've gone to a few to record and ask questions on Common Core. They basically were getting ready to throw me out because they don't want to be on camera talking about it. So you as a parent, it's your job, just like you're here tonight, to find out about Common Core, to get more involved in your kids' education by getting involved politically by going to those meetings. And if you don't like what's going on, then run for school board.
Thank you.
And I know the time is up. I'm trying to look at the clock while we're doing this. Please take a video, get a video on your way out so that you can share information. Make sure you pick up one of the forms. I know they have some flyers back there. Thank you all very much for coming and good night.